Hello and welcome to this edition of Midday Mentors. I'm Richard Pharro. I'm the CEO of APMG International. And today my guest is Natalia Korchakova Heeb, who is a managing director of SDG.17 Consulting and also the founder of PPP Health for All. So I'd like Natalia to say a few words about herself and her interests. I know two of your professional interests are sustainable infrastructure and stakeholder responsibility. Now they're quite interesting concepts, but how do they come together when you look at some of your interests like green buildings and what is a green building? Could you explain what a green building is and how those things sort of come together?
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for having me today. Greetings from Frankfurt. Green buildings are environmentally sustainable buildings that are designed, constructed, and operated to minimize the total environmental impacts the said buildings might have on the world. And the buildings in general, they are responsible for almost 30% of the world carbon emissions. So it's very important to reduce their carbon footprint and impact on the environment. Buildings also in general use approximately up to 40% of the world energy and 20% of the drinking water. It's of course very big numbers. And actually, if we talk about green buildings, to build them, it's cost only 2–3% more than conventional buildings.
Is that really? Is that based on sort of factual evidence from people who build them? Because that seems a very, very small premium to pay for such a major improvement in sustainability. So why isn't every building green?
Well, I think this trend is coming. I think it's just for the industry to realize it and to, to educate and to send this message. So I think it's a kind of misconception that the green buildings are much more expensive. So I'm happy that you asked me this question because I'm feeling like I'm ambassador selling this message, sending this message to all interested parties. So basically, I think in many countries, I think it's a requirement already to have green buildings. For instance, in Australia, in UK, and also in Frankfurt, where I live, all the social infrastructure are built as a zero net buildings and according to the concept of the passive house.
So you're also interested in healthcare, and your interest also in public-private partnerships. So how is a PPP, a public-private partnership procurement, applicable to healthcare? Is it a good option for healthcare development or healthcare investment?
You know, Richard, I'm a big fan of public-private partnerships. But I have to say that PPP is an attractive procurement option only in certain cases. Mm-hmm. And we need to differentiate the rationale for having PPPs for healthcare in developed and developing countries. In developed countries, I think this is the question of efficiency, doing slightly better compared to the traditional procurement. And the quality of public and private healthcare infrastructure is comparable. While in developing countries, the rationale is totally different. There is a huge gap between public and private healthcare. Hospitals are not in good condition. There is a lack of essential medications. There is very old equipment back to the 70s. There is a lack of high-skilled staff who otherwise would prefer to work in private healthcare. So to answer your question, and not to go into discussion about value for money and affordability of PPPs, I would say the PPPs in healthcare are drivers of innovations, which brought by the private sector. Because,
and is that sustainable? Is that,
Sorry?
does this combination between the public and the private sector in healthcare and the innovations from the private sector, does that enable you to develop sustainable healthcare in these emerging or developing economies?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, innovations as such doesn't. I think it's one of the prerequisites for sustainability, but not the only one, of course. I think sustainability itself, it's a big concept which encompasses social, environmental, economic issues. And but in healthcare, I think healthcare is a very special case because it goes through the radical transformations, and that's why innovations in healthcare play so important role. And I think the private sector could bring this resources, innovations, and know-how to the public sector.
Now, Natalia, I know that you're the managing director of SDG.17 Consulting. Now, my understanding is SDG.17 is the 17 sustainability goals from the UN. So when you're talking to people, particularly when you're talking to politicians and you're speaking at conferences, does everybody see these 17 goals as equally important? Or do people just identify one or two? Do countries pick the easy ones or the ones that's going to give them the best profile? Or is there a genuine desire to try to solve the problems across all 17?
Well, I would say when in my audience, and I'm presenting quite very often about SDGs, there are more than 10% of the audience who are familiar with SDGs. I'm already very happy. So it's, I think we all live in a little bit in the SDG bubble. We think everyone knows, but unfortunately not the case. And so just to cut your question in many questions and try to answer them. Yeah, it's not an easy question, to be honest. I think reporting on SDGs is not optimal, whether national governments reporting or companies. Of course, SDGs are subject to national adaptation and localization, and also different SDGs might have different weight and relevance in different countries. So basically, the process here would be to first understand SDGs, to prioritize them, and choose the right management criteria. But yes, of course, if we talk about company reporting, then there is a tendency, of course, to make a cherry picking and to choose SDGs rather on their ease and marketability rather than impact. But I think actually with time this will go away. I think more and more companies are taking it very seriously. The quality of reporting is improving. You also, I think you asked about who prioritized what. I actually came across quite different data. I would say the climate change is one of the SDGs which is prioritized the most, and I would perfectly agree with this because I think this is the priority number one. If we don't cut record high green gas emissions, then the global warming would bring the national disasters, illness, hunger, social unrest, everything which is we are trying to solve with other SDGs. So I think there is understanding about prioritization of SDG number 13, climate change. But otherwise, of course, the companies, if they are reporting, they prefer, I would say, talk about economic development. Maybe SDG3 is also very popular. And
so what is SDG3? What is SDG3?
It's about health and well-being.
Thank you.
Yes. Also, SDG number 17, partnerships. also cited very often in their reports. And it's quite obvious, because if company is doing, for instance, something in social responsibility, then they would position this relevant to SDG.17. This is very often the case.
Natalia, if partnerships is one of these sustainable goals, if you were able to create an advisory board from anywhere in the world to get some real focus and attention on all 17 goals, who would you invite to join your board? Who would you see would be the top team, the A team, in helping the world move towards a more sustainable future and to deal with these global problems?
A very good question, Richard. First of all, I want to say that we actually established advisory board this year for PPP Health for All. An idea was to invite representative, to make it representative, to invite representatives of various countries, various sectors, various stakeholder groups. And I want to mention, it's very interesting because we receive a lot of nominations, and all nominations were for male candidates.
Really? Even today? Even in 2020?
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
It was a big problem for me to identify women. I have to reach out quite specifically and ask them whether they would be interested to take a place in the advisory board. And we still have one place still vacant, which because we pledged to have a 50-50, and we weren't able to manage this. But if we talk about global implementation of SDGs, here I would probably take a little bit different approach, because I think the biggest problem with SDG is that there still remain political agenda for the governments, and not for average people and the companies who still don't really understand them. So I would say we first need to educate people, engage them, and that's why I would take a little bit different approach. I would not invite professionals and politicians, but I would opt for influencers, people who are most popular in the world. According to Brandwatch, this is the pop singers. So I would invite pop singers, actors, comedians, musicians, I don't know, fashion designers, you know, people who known, and ask them to explain what are SDGs in their own words, how they see this. And then I do it, yeah, on every TV and prime time around the world.
But that's a great idea. Over here in the UK, one of our professional footballers, Marcus Rashford, decided we needed to do more about school meals, and he got the government to change their policy regarding free meals for school children who were affected by the COVID lockdown. So your idea of using influencers rather than politicians or scientists or whatever, clearly, yeah, there's a lot of success in it. I've seen personally the success in the UK. So have you reached out to these fashion designers and influencers and band members to get them onto your advisory board?
I'm thinking, actually, and I think it's a good idea. It's a feasible idea, because it's about language, how we formulate. And I think when a politician is speaking, some people just turning off their minds because they're thinking this is not for me. And when people from our environment, from our interest groups, I would say they are speaking differently. So that would create engagement. And for SDG implementation, we need a bottom-up approach. This is very
fascinating. And who was it? Was it didn't Margaret Mead say something like, throughout history, change has come about by a small committee group of people coming together to effect that change. So your idea of if you can find a small group of influencers and then they did start to influence, then maybe that would be the way to go. Hopefully some influencers may hear this conversation and maybe people will get in touch. But if there is anyone out there who thinks there might be an influencer that they know who would be interested in helping to change the way people think about the sustainability goals, then maybe they will put you in touch with them.
I wish so, absolutely. I think they definitely deserve to be explained and to be marketed, because if we have a new policy, every policy has to be marketed properly.
Yeah. Natalia, it's been really great talking to you. Thank you for sharing your views on PPP, healthcare, sustainability. Good luck with your ambition to change the world from the bottom up, so that we do have time to deal with certainly climate change and then the other sustainability goals. So thank you very much for sharing your views with us.
Thank you very much, Richard, for inviting me. Thank you. Bye-bye.